Welcome and thank you for waiting. All participants will remain in a listen-only mode for the duration of today's webinar. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be posted publicly. If you have any objections, you may disconnect at this time. I would now like to turn the call over to your host for today, Faith. Faith, go ahead.
Thanks so much, Anthony. Good afternoon and welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this webinar event, Housing Data Hunting on data.census.gov. My name is Faith Whittington, and I will be your host for today's event, where our presenter will explain how to access and visualize housing characteristics data. The presenter will demonstrate how easily accessible housing data is by covering popular topics such as homeownership status, monthly housing costs, vacancy rates, and mortgage status. Before we get started, I just wanted to take a moment to thank my Census Bureau colleagues for joining me today and helping to support our speaker. I'll turn things over to Tyson in just a moment, but first I have a few housekeeping items to share with you all. We have a wonderful panel of subject matter experts with us today, and they are here to help us answer whatever questions they can. So as we go through this presentation, we would like to encourage you all to make use of the Q&A panel in the WebEx to submit questions that you might have. The question and answer panel is located all the way at the bottom right of your WebEx screen. If you cannot see it, you may need to click on the three dots at the bottom right to pull it up. And at the end of the webinar, we will go over some of those questions that were submitted through the Q&A panel. A quick note: on the final question and answer session, we will focus on the platform data.census.gov. We will not be able to go in depth to address questions on the topic of housing data and the collection process, methodology, or census products. Finally, we are recording the webinar today, and all the materials for this training session will be available through the Census Academy website. Welcome again, and thank you so much for joining us. It's my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Tyson Weister. Welcome, Tyson.
Thank you, Faith, and thank you all for spending your afternoon with us today on housing data hunting on data.census.gov. My name is Tyson. I work in the Center for Enterprise Dissemination. We are the area that's responsible for data.census.gov and the API. So with that, if you want just some brief information about data.census.gov, hopefully you've used it before. We are the primary platform to get data at the Census Bureau. What that means is we have data from the most popular surveys and programs. It includes decennial census data back to the 2000 census, American Community Survey data back to 2010, and economic census and selected economic surveys back to 2012. So if you'd like a detailed listing, you can visit the link below and dive into more. But for today's demonstration, we are focused primarily on housing data. There are a number of data sets on our site that provide housing information. What we're going to be focusing on today in our demonstration is primarily the housing data from the American Community Survey. We'll also cover an example with the decennial census, and then at the end, talk more about additional data sets and gems for you to explore further for housing. For the American Community Survey, it covers a breadth of information, and this slide here is just showcasing on the right-hand side the variety of housing topics that are available to you through the ACS. As you can see, there covers quite the gamut, things like ownership status. I'm not going to read them off, but we will take a look through the variety of topics in our very first example. So that table will cover a wide variety of housing topics all in one table view for you. The ACS, of course, also covers additional characteristics of people, but today we're focusing on housing data. There are multiple ways that you can go about searching on data.census.gov. We are going to touch on both of those ways in today's demonstration. The single search bar works great for quick searches and keywords. And beyond that, the advanced search is a really great approach to go about searching. It's my favorite way to specify my search criteria. I don't have to come up with my own words and phrases, and I just click through these panels. I can explore different options and choose one or more checkboxes as a final selection. So single search is a great start. The filters are a very precise way for you to select your search criteria. So we're going to showcase both of those today. And to start with housing data, we are going to jump right into table DP04. If you are a lover of house data, you could consider table DP04 to be your best friend on data.census.gov. So let's take a look at this table for Allen County, Indiana. So on the live site here, you'll want to go to data.census.gov. On the landing page, you'll notice right here, you can't miss it, the single search bar. This is a really great place for you to type in table IDs. And again, if you're interested in housing data, you might want to make note or memorize DP04. It's a very powerful table for you to access the data. So you can just plop that in the single search bar and press enter. On the left-hand side, you'll see filters. You may need to expand the panel out manually. This is my favorite way to select, especially geographies. So it's the most precise way to make those selections. And here's where I'm going to specify that I want the table for Allen County. So on the left-hand side, you'll notice that geographies for some of the most popular areas are shown, as well as a detailed listing for all geographic areas. What we're working with today will be covered through these most popular selections. So choosing county, then Indiana, and then Allen County, Indiana. So you're looking for a checkbox that is going to register that as a final geography selection, and you'll see the filter's been added to the upper left. If you aren't familiar with Allen County, it is home to Fort Wayne, Indiana. It's the second largest city in the state. And you may have noticed Fort Wayne frequently appears as one of the most affordable cities to live in. So I thought it'd be interesting to explore the data for housing for this particular county for our analysis. And also, I happen to have went to school here, so just kind of interesting, but you could, of course, customize this to any county or other geography selection that you want to start diving in the data for. So here on the table results list, we see that this table search for DP04 has cut us right into this data table. You'll want to take a moment to view the information at the top of your screen. We can see the data comes from the American Community Survey. It comes from the 2024 ACS one-year estimates. And if you click into that drop-down menu, you can see that you can access the data historically back to 2010 if you're interested. And ACS one-year are provided for areas with 65,000 people or more. The ACS five-year estimates are available for all geographic areas, regardless of population size, for this table down to the census tract level. So I'm going to leave it at the most recent ACS one-year data, and we're going to take a dive of the table. So I can see here in my column, I see data for Allen County. And just to simplify my view, we're going to talk more about margins of error very briefly, but in just a moment. For now, I'm going to press the button at the top and simplify our view a little bit. So we're left with the remaining two columns for estimate and percent. You'll notice on the left-hand side in capital letters, there are different sections of the table covering a variety of housing data. So we're actually going to scroll through, and I'm just going to take a tour here for you so you can see the data that are available for you to access from this table. So reading out some of the information, we can see the first section, housing occupancy, 93.4% of housing units in Allen County are occupied. The remaining 6.6% are vacant. Next, we see some data for units in structure, with one unit detached being the most common. So this is what you would think of as your single-family detached standalone homes, 72.1% of total housing units fit that in Allen County, Indiana. That is higher than the national average, but not too surprising given that Indiana is, as a whole, is higher than average on that. Next, year structure built. You can see when you look at the percentages here that the housing mix comes from a variety of years over time. We provide data for the total number of rooms and the total number of bedrooms. So as an example here, we can see that the most common category for bedrooms is housing units with 3 bedrooms. That represents 42% of housing units in Allen County. Do keep in mind when I'm referring to housing units, that includes all housing units. So traditional homes, townhomes, apartments, condos, etc. Just below this, we see housing tenure. It shows us that there's a total of 158,955 occupied housing units in the county. Out of that number, 69.8% are occupied by an owner of the home, and 30.2% are occupied by a renter. This is a higher homeownership than the national rate. Scrolling down a bit, we can see the year the householder moved into the unit. Looking at these percentages, seeing that most people moved into the home that they currently live in 2010 or later. Scrolling down, we can see vehicles available for the household, noting that 8.3% of households in Allen County do not have a vehicle available. The next section, house heating fuel. You can see the top 2 categories, 70.7% of homes get their heat from utility gas, so those underground pipes, and electricity being the second most common method with 25.5% of house heating coming from electricity. So not too surprising to see in a county with a very large city that such a high percentage of the homes are being heated through utilities. But just also note that these other heating options are available for you to dive into the data. We also have some characteristics here for special cases where the housing unit lacks complete facilities, data on occupants per room. And then we also have data for home value. So one thing to keep in mind, the data that we're looking at that comes from the American Community Survey, it is based on a sample, and it's also based on responses from the person responding to the survey, right? So when we're getting this home value data, we are asking the homeowner what their estimated value of the home would be in order to produce this statistics. That's true of all of the data that we're looking at, not just this particular section. Notice here that the median home value, $249,100, that is over $100,000 less than the national median. We also provide data through this table for housing units with a mortgage and without a mortgage. We can see that owner-occupied housing units, about 63.9% of those in Allen County, have a mortgage. The remaining do not. And then not only do we look at home mortgage, but we also look at the selected monthly owner costs. So this includes the total principal, interest payments, as well as taxes that you pay, homeowners insurance, and other utilities that are lumped into this one number. You can see that the median housing costs for housing units with a mortgage is $1,434. And for housing units without a mortgage, $559 is the median. We look at those costs, but also the American Community Survey collects information on income. So we also provide through this table housing costs represented as a percentage of household income. You can see here as an example, 35% or more, that there are 12,257 housing units in Allen County, Indiana, that are spending 35% or more of household income on housing costs. And this particular one that I'm looking at is referencing the data for housing units that have a mortgage, or about 17.3% of those households. So just another interesting way for you to look at the data, especially if you might be interested in housing cost burdened households. You can see some of the categories here. So we provide that information for housing units with a mortgage, housing units without a mortgage. And then similarly, these data are provided for rent, where you can see median rent is $1,071 and gross rent as a percentage of household income, with the breakouts and percentages here for you. So hopefully you've enjoyed the tour of the wealth of information and just got some ideas for data that you could explore for your own geography. I wanted to take a moment here. If you want to look at data side by side, you can select more than one geography at a time. So if you expand the filter panel back out, I'm going to click here on nation and choose the US. I mentioned a couple times some comparisons, whether something in the table was higher or lower than the US number. This is how you would see the data in the table side by side. And then at the Census Bureau, we do recommend taking margins of errors into account anytime you're making comparisons. So here I have narrowed the table down to the percent and percent margin of error. From a how-to standpoint, you can select this table, all of the cells that you're seeing here. I use the keyboard shortcut for Control-A. Then you can right-click and copy this information and input it into Excel. At the Census Bureau, we happen to have a statistical testing tool that will do this testing for you. And you can see once you paste the data in the tool, it will tell you whether those estimates are statistically different from each other. So not going to get into the details of margins of error beyond this for the scope of what we're doing today, but did just want to put a little plug that this is available for your analysis and that you can copy and paste table cells very easily using our platform. All right, now that we've taken a tour of different data in DP04, let's start touring the different functionality and search strategies on data.census.gov. One of those is address search. So for this example, I'm going to show you how to select your geography by typing in an address. So we're going to look at median home value for the census tract that includes 400 Broad Street, Seattle, Washington. Back on the live site, I'll click the US Census logo in the upper left to start us fresh on the landing page. The trickiest part of address search is knowing that it exists and knowing that you need to click the geography pin icon. So you'll see it here in the single search bar. When you click that icon, you'll get a pop-up window, and it's very intuitive and self-explanatory from here. So we'll type in the address, 400 Broad Street. If you've ever been to the Space Needle, you've actually been to this address. So I'm going to go ahead and once I have all the information input, click search. And if you typed an address that has a match in our system, where we get this from our geocoding, you will see what we call the address card. So it's telling us at the top, it did find a match for this address. And then you get a list of different Census Bureau geographies that this address falls within. So we can look at the county, the congressional district, the school district, as well as some neighborhood level geographies, such as the census tract that this address range is part of. Notice that this is a clickable list. So when I hover over Census Tract 71.01, I can go ahead and click, which will ultimately select this as a filter. This is an identical selection as if we had manually went through the filter panel for Census Tract and chose 71.01, except I didn't need to know that I needed that Census Tract in the first place. I just needed to know an address. We are going to in just a moment, look at the census tract visually. So don't be worried if you aren't familiar with what this geography is. It will make a lot more sense in just another moment. But assuming you want to look at some data for this area, you would then click the Tables tab at the top. This is telling us that there are 1,270 total tables on data.census.gov for this tract. This is where the filter panel on the left can come in very handy for you. You can see there is a section under topics called housing. And then you can drill into the options. We'll click financial characteristics and then choose housing value and purchase price. So with that selection, we'll go ahead and click the X at the top. We have narrowed our list of results from over 1,000 tables to the 20 tables that match housing value and provide data for census tract 71.01. So let's take a look at this in a little more detail. On the left-hand side, you can see the different table titles. You can click on one of interest and see the data will be loaded on the right-hand side of your screen. So the one I wanted was actually median home value. I see table B25077 is called median value. And when I look at the table data, we see the data comes from the American Community Survey. The universe or concept that this table refers to is for the total owner-occupied housing units, and that the median value of those units is approximately $540,300. So great that we have some of this information, but again, what is Census Tract 71.01? You can visually see this on the maps. So when you've selected a single geography and then click Maps at the top, you may need to manually change the layer of your map. So if it didn't zoom you in directly to the census tract, there's a button at the top called Layer. You may need to manually also select the census tract geography here. The layer is just the primary level of geography for your maps. So here I'm going to choose census tract. And again, depending on your exact steps, this may have happened automatically for you, or you may have manually needed to change the layer. But here it recognizes we've selected census tract 71.01 previously. It's zoomed us into this area, and you'll notice that street lines and street labels populate as you get zoomed in. So when we were looking at that median home value data, this is the area that information was referring to. Right, moving on to our next example, rather than just use the maps for reference purposes, I also wanted to show you how to map out data across the wide variety of geographies, as well as visualize it using our newer chart functionality. So for this example, we're going to look at the home ownership rate for all metropolitan and micropolitan statistical areas in the US from the ACS 5-year data profiles. Back on the live site, I'll click the census logo to start fresh from the landing page. And we're done with the single search for our demonstration. I'm going to be using the advanced search, which we also call filters. We refer to those interchangeably. So to get directly to the filters, just click advanced search. And then on the left-hand side, you'll see metropolitan, micropolitan statistical area. Again, we're going to see these visually on the map. They are areas of one or more counties combined together. So when we choose that list or that option, we get a list of all of the areas. For my analysis, I'm going to choose these checkboxes, the second and third one. The second checkbox gives me data for all metropolitan statistical areas, and then the third one gives me data for all micropolitan statistical areas. Next, on the left-hand side, we showed you how to choose by topic. You can also choose your tables by survey if you know them. So I'm going to choose to navigate to the American Community Survey 5-year data profiles. We'll choose American Community Survey, 5-year estimates, and then data profiles. This is an alternative way for you to get to what I call your best friend for housing data, table DP04. So just another way to go about searching for that. We have our 2 geographies and the survey filter. So I'm going to go ahead and run the search by clicking search in the lower right. Then I'll click tables at the top. And here we get to our results. So I like the data profiles, not just for the housing data, but it's really nice. Generally, there are 5 total data profiles, 1 specific to Puerto Rico geographies, and they cover popular statistics for the ACS across social, economic, housing, and demographic characteristics. So you may want to explore additional data beyond housing. This would be a good search for you. But of course, for today's webinar, we are focused on housing. So we're going to click again, DP04. And we'll give a moment here for the table to work to give us a message. You'll see the message that says the table's too large to display. If you see this message, don't get intimidated. It means that there's over 1,000 columns in the table, and it may take a moment to load if you decide to proceed with loading it. So what you want to do typically is look for the link in the lower right that says open the table. You may need to click it twice, but even with that, it's still opened really fast for us. And you may be wondering, why are we looking at the table? I thought we were creating a map in a chart. All of our map and charts on data.census.gov are based on underlying data tables. So that means that you can map out any estimate you see from our data table, but you do want to make sure that you're clicked into a table that has data you want to map out. We probably know this already since we took a deep dive into DP04 in our first example, but just to refresh our memory, when we scroll down a little bit in this table, we see the housing tenure section and then the owner occupied. So this is telling us, as an example, in Abilene, Texas metropolitan statistical area, 63.5% of occupied housing units are occupied by an owner. So if you're wanting to map out what you would consider the home ownership rate, this is the number you'd be looking for. As you scroll to the right of the table, you would see this across all of the different metropolitan and micropolitan statistical areas in the US. So wonderful, we have this in a table. What if we want to explore this visually? At this point, you would just click the Maps tab at the top. Couple things you'll want to do on the left-hand side when you expand the results out. Make sure you're still clicked into the table that has data you want to map. We know DP04 is the table we want. We see it in the orange bar and shading. You'll want to make sure your map is set to the correct geographic level. We can see visually that these are metro areas. You can see metro area in the legend. And again, you can always click the layer button and confirm that you're clicked into the right area. So in this case, all of those things have happened automatically for us. We just need to tell the system, out of all the estimates in that very large data table, which one do we want shown on the map? So here's where you would click in the upper left, that drop-down menu. You'll notice everything here is laid out in the same order that the rows were in the data table. So remember, we scrolled down quite a bit to get to housing tenure, and then we see owner occupied. Before I click that, I just want to note too, if you look below, you have the option to map out numbers, so the totals or the percent, and anytime a percent is provided in the data table that you're working with, we default to mapping out percents. So I'm actually going to leave it as percent, just pointing that out before I click owner occupied, that we are mapping out the percent. of housing units that are owner occupied. And here we can take a look at our map. So what this is showing us is that areas in darker shades of blue have higher home ownership rates compared to metro or micro areas in lighter shades of blue. So really helpful to see this on a map. You can see, as an example, areas across Florida with some darker shades of blue, areas across parts of the Midwest and into Pennsylvania, and then areas in the West with some of those darker shades of blue clustered together. And then also you see on the flip side some areas with lighter shades of blue in states such as California and other areas on your map. If you'd like to zoom your analysis in a little bit more, here I'm going to choose Indiana as an example. As we zoom in, you'll start to see the labels for these areas, and kind of interesting, but not surprising, to see these lighter shades of blue in Bloomington, the Bloomington metro area, and the Lafayette, West Lafayette metro area. These are big college towns for Indiana University and Purdue University. So not too surprising, that would maybe draw their homeownership rate down a little bit more. Some other things that you can get visually by looking at this is if you start zooming and clicking into some of these areas with the darkest shade of blue, you'll notice that many of them are considered micropolitan statistical areas. So those are areas that are not quite as large as metro areas. When you look towards the larger city centers, you tend to see lighter, comparatively, shades of blue. So just really helpful that we could, take a look at this visually and in just a few moments get some more insight into the data than we could have from that table view. A couple things I want to note here: when you click more tools at the top, if you'd like to save the map, you can print. That will give you a PDF where the first page is going to be this map. You can also grab the URL from the address bar. What I wanted to show you next, though, is an additional way to visualize the data. And just to simplify this, I'm actually going to just focus on the metropolitan statistical areas. So I'm going to take the micropolitan areas out. When you expand the filter panel, you'll notice there's an X for areas that you want to delete. In case you add a filter and want to change it later, you could certainly delete that. The areas that we have shaded on the map are metro areas, and the remaining areas are micro areas. But now let's go ahead and look at the chart. So we see here, when you click more tools and chart, then I'm going to click DP04. The process of making a chart is almost identical to the process of making a map. You have the same drop-down menu at the top. We'll choose owner occupied. And if I didn't make that geography edit, this would have all carried over automatically, seamlessly. But I just wanted to simplify the view bit here. And then you can also chart the data in ascending or descending order. So kind of helpful as another tool for you to look at this information. You can turn on margins of error as well using the button at the top. And then you have the choice between typically two chart types, bar charts and column charts, just depending on the format. We can see here some of the metro areas with the highest home ownership rates being some in Florida. And when we scroll to the right-hand side of the table, we can also see some of the areas with the lowest home ownership rates. Great. Now that we have visualized the data, I also wanted to show you one more example on the site before we give you some additional gems before we open up and transition towards questions. This last example is going to look at comparing across geographies in a table. So we're just going to show you more detailed ways to go about searching and viewing these data side by side. For this example, I'm going to look at household size in Alabama, Jefferson County, and Birmingham from the 2020 census. So back on the live site, I'll click the US Census logo in the upper left. We're going to use the advanced search filters. And I'm going to select my criteria. So I'm going to start with my geography. On the left, I'm going to choose state and then Alabama. After you make each click, just verify in the upper left it's adding your selection. Next, I'm going to choose Jefferson County by clicking on County, Alabama, and then find the checkbox for Jefferson County. And then the last geography is going to be for Birmingham. So for most places across the country, for most states, you would consider your city or town as a place level geography. There are a few states, primarily in the Northeast and Midwest, where you have towns and townships that are county subdivisions. So just kind of pointing that out here for Alabama, we're going to use that place level geography, choose Alabama, and we'll see a list of all of them, which will include Birmingham. All right, so I have my 3 geographies selected. We'll see here in the upper left, Alabama, Jefferson County, and Birmingham. And then I'm going to narrow my analysis down to the decennial census. So this is going to be an optional step. Again, you don't have to know your data set and specify that. It's just an additional criteria for you to narrow down your result a little bit. So here I'm going to choose decennial census and then demographic and housing characteristics. Again, recognizing that you may not know this up front, and that's totally fine. You can search by topic as well. So once this loads, we're actually going to add a topic that I think you'll find useful to accessing the data, and it's just going to be the general housing topic. On the left-hand side, we'll choose under topics, housing, and then mark the checkbox for housing. So just kind of pointing out here, you can select a very detailed housing topic like we did when we wanted housing value, or you can just choose a general housing checkbox and look at all of the applicable housing tables and just explore them. Here I have my search, 3 geographies, data set, and topic. I'm going to click search in the lower right and tables at the top. This tells me that there are 153 tables from the decennial census that provide information for at least one of the geographies and are related to housing. Again, you can scroll through this list of results. I wanted to look at household size, so I'm going to choose this one, table H12 from the decennial census. It provides household size, but it also breaks it down by tenure, whether people own or rent the housing unit that they are living in. Now, looking at this table result, we see at the very top, it comes from the decennial census. The concept this applies to is all occupied housing units. And then we see the data with each of our geographies represented as a column. We had this experience in our first example, so this shouldn't be too unfamiliar to you. And then kind of reading out the data here, it gives us household size first for owner-occupied housing units and then for renter-occupied housing units. So as an example, if we look at owner-occupied, we can see in Alabama the most common household size would be a 2-person household. Same thing for Jefferson County, but in Birmingham, for owner-occupied units, it's actually a little bit more common to have a 1-person household. Looking at the data for renter-occupied units, we can see that the most common category across all 3 geographies is for 1-person households for renter-occupied units compared to any other specific number as displayed here. All right, so the last thing I want to show you on the live site is how you can save the table results. We've shown you all types of different ways to go about searching and how to visualize the data. When you want to save it, there's a few options at the top that I think are going to be of interest to you. One is the download button. When you click download, there's 2 primary ways to output the information using the first and last radio button. So the Excel option, if you click download and follow the prompts through, Notice it's telling you it's going to give you a presentation ready format. So I've already downloaded and opened the file. When you choose Excel, you're going to get a file with 2 tabs. The first tab has some source information, and the second tab has data is the label and is probably what you're most interested in. Notice this looks almost identical to what we saw on screen. Our geographies are here in the columns, and everything's very readable and indented nicely like it was in the table. So if your goal is to view the information yourself later or print it, this is a good option for you. If you're wanting to work with the data, what you're probably looking for is this last button called the zip format. This is going to give you flat machine readable files. It's going to include geo IDs. So if you wanted to take this information, maybe do some sorting with it in your own software or map it with GIS software, you're probably wanting the zip file format. When you go through the process and open up the file, you're going to see here it is, again, machine readable. So rather than seeing the information for your geographies in the columns and everything nicely formatted and indented, you get one row for each geography. And as you follow the row across, you'll notice all of the estimates from the table display are here without any special formatting. Right, 2 more ways to save the information. One is the share button. You'll see under more tools, when you click share, it gives you some quick options to share it on social media, email, and again, that URL, that's the same as the one from your address bar. When you visit this table later or share it with a colleague, it is going to take you back to the same search with all your geographies and the same table selection. And then the last thing I wanted to point out really quickly is we hope that when you work with our data, you cite us. We have citations ready for you at the top of the table. When you click cite, you'll see information in different formats, MLA, APA, etc. So these are ready for you to copy and paste. That is going to wrap up our demo. If this webinar was an infomercial, that is where we would be saying right now, but wait, there's more. But in all seriousness, there's lots of other data available to you related to housing, both on data.census.gov and outside of data.census.gov. So I wanted to take a moment just to highlight those for you here. On data.census.gov, we have lots of housing-related business data. So programs like the economic census and some annual surveys provide this business data. And some of this is related to housing. So an obvious example is, of course, looking at the construction industry. There may be lots of other examples where you can dive into some economic data related to housing. If you're interested in construction specifically, you can look at things like total number of employees working in construction, annual payroll, and other key metrics. The easiest way to dive into this data in the filter panel, you would look for the code section, choose industry codes, NAICS, and then you would see the construction option, as well as more detailed pieces of the construction industry as you dive in further. So we hope you take a look at some of these data if that's of interest to you. A couple other housing related data sets that are more niche but available on data.census.gov. There's 2 different survey filters that you may be interested in looking at. One is called the Survey of Market Absorption. So this looks at newly constructed multifamily units that have recently been taken off the market, for instance, because they sold, and then different information about the amenities, rent sales price, number of units in the structure, type of building, etc. So again, if you'd like to explore this information, choose that filter. And again, it's for multifamily units. This particular table is showing condos and co-op units as an example. Another niche filter with some housing related data on our site is the Rental Housing Finance Survey. This will look at rental housing properties across the United States and then financial, mortgage, and property characteristics for those rental housing units. I've also included here at the bottom links to learn more about each of the data sets. Again, if you'd like to dive into the data, look for these filters within data.census.gov. Moving beyond what we have on our site, there's also very popular housing related data sets at the Census Bureau that are conducted by us, but data that we don't have currently available on data.census.gov. I wanted to bring these to your attention. One of the very popular ones is the American Housing Survey, or AHS. It's the nation's most comprehensive housing survey. And I say comprehensive in terms of the amount of topics that they offer. So in comparison to the American Community Survey, the ACS is going to let you drill down into smaller geographic levels like census tracts, counties, cities, etc. The American Housing Survey is limited primarily to the national level. They do cover selected metropolitan statistical areas as well. But again, the right-hand side of the screen shows you some of the topics that are covered. So you'll be able to access the data for certain topics that are not covered through the ACS. For instance, repair costs, housing quality, HVAC and appliances. I'll leave you to read through this if you're interested. And if you want to access the data, the primary way to do so is through a separate tool called the AHS Table Creator. I do have the link here on the slide for you. And then just to note, this is conducted by the Census Bureau and sponsored by the Housing and Urban Development. Two other major housing-related programs at the Census Bureau come from the Building Permits Survey and the Survey of Construction. So these provide economic indicators for new housing units. And you can kind of look at this in a few different ways. So you'll notice that there's 3 links here at the bottom. You can look at new housing construction in terms of how many new homes are authorized to be built through the permits data that we get. How many of those authorizations carry over into actual home construction that gets completed. And then once the home is completed through the new construction, when the home sold, and just kind of looking at all of the different characteristics of some of the data throughout the process. So if you'd like to dive into the data, again, it's separated by new residential construction. That includes the building permits, which does get revised and updated a short time after the new residential construction data are released, and then the new residential sales link. So check out these links if you'd like to learn more about new construction and sales data. What I've covered so far is certainly not a comprehensive list of all of the housing data at the Census Bureau. So if you'd like to explore further, I would recommend checking out the Housing Topics webpage. It will include a lot of the information that I have alluded to, but again, with some more detailed information here. So moving away from different data that are available, just some additional wrap-up information. We are available for feedback. You can reach us at census.data@census.gov. We take suggestions on how to make the site better and answer your data questions. You can stay up to date for our site through our monthly newsletter. We alert you to educational opportunities, data releases, and system enhancements. We encourage you to visit this and sign up through the QR code. What we covered today is a live demonstration. We have hands-on opportunities for you to make the most of the site, including workshops on basic, advanced, and mapping on data.census.gov. You can visit these and tune in free of charge. They're anywhere from 2 to 3 hours in length. They're online, and we offer them monthly. So you can view our current schedule using the link and QR code here and check back regularly for additional offerings. And final, before I turn it over to Faith, we are conducting more formal, structured research to improve data.census.gov. So if you'd like to volunteer to be part of one of these sessions, it's called our usability testing. It would involve you giving an hour of your time to participate in one of these sessions. So what would happen here is you would get like a structured set of questions to work through. We would have you share your screen in a Microsoft Teams meeting and then also ask you to speak aloud your thought process as you're navigating through the site. This allows us the opportunity to observe how users are interacting with data.census.gov in real time, so we can make more informed decisions on how to tweak the site and improve it for you. So to get signed up, you would just visit the link and fill out our screener. We're also here for your questions. And with that, I will turn things over to Faith. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Tyson. So in a few minutes, we will start going over some of the questions submitted through the Q&A panel. So if you have questions on searching for on housing data on this site, please feel free to submit that now. But before we dive into your questions, I want to let you know that we've set up a quick evaluation survey that will pop up when you exit WebEx. When you see the survey window, please take a moment to share your thoughts with us. We'd love to hear how it worked out, what we could do better, and especially any other topics you're interested in learning about in future webinars and workshops. If you have any questions remaining after our session concludes, or if you'd prefer to email us your questions, please feel free to reach out to any of the email boxes listed here. If you are a member of the media, please contact the Public Information Office at the email address you see here at pio@census.gov. For general questions, for general data.census.gov questions from the public or for training requests, please reach out to the Center for Enterprise Dissemination. You may also reach out to the Housing Statistics team via email, and their email is also right here at the bottom of the slide, along with their phone number. And we look forward to hearing from you. All right, so now we can move to questions that we have received, Tyson. So let's see here. Let me go ahead. There we go. All right, for the first question, I'm curious if the data can be classified by the type for manufactured homes, condos, and naturally occurring affordable housing. Can you see if condos are rented instead of owned?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Wanted to just go back to the site here really quickly. So just to look back at DPO4, this provides more high-level type information. So it does break out some of the home ownership types, and I need to get rid of some of these filters. Let me just start fresh. Under the units and structure, you'll see some data that provides, I had called out for one unit detached, but when you get to the bottom, you can see mobile home is one of the examples here. Also, when you look at some of our other more detailed tables, so DP04 is a good high-level starting point, but when you have more detailed questions like yours, you would want to look at the housing search by topic filters and choose a filter that's going to be a little bit more applicable to your analysis, like units and stories and structure. And from here, you would be able to view some more detailed information. So I think my colleague had pointed here to table B25032. That's kind of how you would go about finding the table, and you can see, at least for mobile home, they provide information, whether it's owned or rented. And then you can see some of these aren't necessarily specified in this particular table as just condo, but it does indicate some of the multifamily units and whether those are owned versus rented. So this would be a good source for your information. And that is going to wrap up what I have. One thing I did mean to mention, we do have our subject matter expert. So if there's anything that needs to be added, she can feel free to jump in. Otherwise, this should be a good start in getting your question answered. And if you have further questions, we would encourage you to connect with us individually.
I just wanted to add, I'm Molly Ross. I work in the housing statistics branch. Something like units and structure isn't super intuitive. So we also have on the ACS website, under the technical documentation page, you can find a full list of all of the tables we have. So you can do like a control F and kind of, because you never know what you don't know. So you can see a full list and maybe find tables you might want to look up there as well.
Thank you both. I think that is all for the questions that we had received in the Q&A. So thank you all for those questions. And Tyson, I guess I will go ahead and turn things over to you now for any other final thoughts.
Sure. So I'll share some additional resources here. One is the help button for data.census.gov. When you click that, or if you visit the link here on this slide or the QR code, it's going to take you to a full suite of educational materials to help you make the most of data.census.gov. So we have the workshops that I alluded to earlier, but we also have other full-length webinars that are being recorded or have been recorded, just like this one is. We have short video tutorials, PDFs with step-by-step instructions and answers to your frequently asked questions. So we encourage you to visit that. Again, if you have data questions, you can shoot us an email at census.data@census.gov. And then we also take training requests. If you're a national organization, we would certainly invite you to submit a training request on data.census.gov or the API to our team at ced.cedsci.outreach@census.gov. But we also have additional trainers available to you. So you have a data dissemination specialist assigned to your state. These specialists are located locally throughout the country, and they're also folks that are hosting the webinar with us today. So they have a centralized training hub on census.gov/academy, and they're there for your training requests as well. My team specializes more in data.census.gov and the API. The data dissemination specialists are the jack of all trades for all things Census Bureau, regardless of the particular tool or topic that you're interested in. And if you'd like to reach out to them for a training, you can contact them at census.askdata@census.gov or 1-844-ASK-DATA. Thank you so much for joining us in today's session, and we look forward to seeing you again in a future webinar.
The session has ended. You may disconnect at this time.